So, what do Middle-earth and my hobby shed have in common? They are both totally infested with spiders, of course. The most famous arachnid in all of Middle-earth is probably Shelob, the gargantuan spider who lives in the caves near Cirith Ungol, and preys on any unwitting orcs or hobbits who happen to stray too close to her sticky webs. And how about Thorin's company, who are also famously captured by spiders whilst journeying through Mirkwood, and are, if you like the movie version of events, rescued by Legolas and Tauriel? Let's not linger on that too deeply, but my point is, essentially, Middle-earth has a spider problem. Now, I don't particularly mind these spiders that inhabit my shed. Not only are they thankfully significantly smaller than their Middle-earth counterparts, but they also keep the numbers of creepy crawly pests down. These little dudes are, however, the inspiration for an army that I've started working on, and with the help of Michael from Nat1 Videos and John from JMax Armies of Middle-earth, we're going to create a thematic set of terrain and two opposing armies to create a sort of joint diorama of sorts, and I think it's going to look awesome. I'm Benji, and welcome to Benji's Hobbies. Now, the Fell Beings of Mirkwood army is one I wanted to build for the longest time. It's essentially a mixed list which contains predominantly orcs, but the thing that really sets it apart is the addition of creepy critters such as bats, wolves, and my personal favourite of the lot, spiders. Games Workshop do have official models, but at £37.50 for just 4 models, they are beyond what I can personally justify spending on what are essentially pretty generic spider models. However, in my big pile of grey, I did have a box of Fantasy Spiders by Wargames Atlantic, which I brought from my mate Ollie at Broadsword Wargaming some time ago. I'll link everything I use in the video down below, so if you want to go and check them out or want to go and buy some for yourselves, then go and have a look down there. If you're on a budget like I am, these guys are super cheap, and you can get a pretty impressive spider army from just one box. So there is actually a surprising amount of stuff in this box. There is enough to make 24 multi-part plastic models. It comes across 6 sprues. Having had a quick look at them, there's loads of really cool details and things on them. Some of them are kind of mechanical legs and some sort of space lasery looking weapons. So if that's sort of your thing, they're covered too, but it's not quite the look that I'm going for today. But I'm going to put them together and see how they look. Now, one big complaint I have heard about this kit is working out what legs go where, but there are some instructions for this on the Wargames Atlantic website. Now, I'd recommend using superglue and superglue activator to make sure that the legs stick in place as they should when you're trying to glue them. If you don't use activator, then you're having to hold the legs there for a bit longer, and yeah, it just sometimes doesn't kind of work out. Whereas if you're using activator like I am, they should glue in place instantly. Now, one issue that I kind of have with spiders on the tabletop is they can be pretty characterless. I mean, it's difficult to add any real character or flavour to a model that doesn't really have any facial expressions. So my aim for these guys is to almost create mini dioramas on their bases to make them not only unique from each other, but stand out a bit more on the tabletop and make them easier to identify whilst playing the game. For this, I'm going to be using a combination of bits, both bought and 3D printed, to create some more interesting bases. Finding STL files for this sort of thing has become so easy these days, with Cults 3D and My Mini Factory being super easy to navigate to find what you're after. I went with some broken trees, tree stumps, and some orky looking savage cages. I also have some 3D printed tree armatures lying around that I bought off eBay a long time ago, which I thought could be useful for this little project as well. Finally, I have some resin stones and boulders, which are the perfect scale for these minis, which I picked up from Generation Shift. Not only does he make some incredible bases, but some cool basing bits too, so he's well worth checking out. Again, there will be a link down in the description below. With all my bits 3D printed and assembled, the next step is to glue all of these down to the relevant bases. Now, this step does take a bit of finessing, moving backwards and forwards between layouts and fitting the spiders in place to see if it works and what doesn't work, but I actually found this really enjoyable and fun to do. Creating these little scenes and having some more space to work with than a standard 25 or 40mm base was a lot of fun and allowed me to do more than I would be able to do normally with just standard size bases. With the layout set and glued in place, it's time to add some ground texture, and I'm using the Dark Earth diorama mud from AK Interactive. Now this stuff is designed so that it can be used straight out of the pot. Once it's dry, you are done. However, once this is dry, I am going to be painting over it. I just use a small sculpting tool to push it around the base and try to add a bit of texture rather than letting it dry in sort of two bigger blobs. This again is another really satisfying part of basing because it helps all the basing elements blend together rather than looking like they've just been glued down on the base. Before the mud dries, I add some final texture and more basing elements. I scatter in some large grit and attach some resin skulls in moderation. I think skulls and gore can look great on Age of Sigmar and 40k models, but are very easy to overdo in a Middle-earth setting. I definitely think in this situation, less is more. With the bases dry, it's time to prime, and as my base coat, I'm going with Raven Black from Colourforge, followed by Ghoul Grey and a light blast of white as a dusting. The Zenithal Prime will help make painting these a little easier in the next steps, and it's always cool to see everything in one colour. For some reason, I always love a project when it gets to this stage, when you've been kind of building things and putting different bits together, and once it's all the same colour, it just seems to look like what you want it to look like. That was a massive ramble, but I think you get the gist of it. With regards to painting, I'm going with a very simple scheme with these. Not much will be showing through once I'm done, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'm using the speed paints from Army Painter for this, painting the rocks in grey, but also adding a little green in the recesses to simulate moss growth, the ground and trees in varying tones of brown, and of course picking out the skulls in a bone colour. But of course, if you're a bit clumsy and careless like me, accidents are always just around the corner. Okay, so I've just been a bit of an idiot, really. And I should absolutely know better now because this has happened to me before. But I squeezed the speed paint pot just a little bit too hard. And it just went everywhere. So yeah, I've got more speed paint out than I know what to do with. So I'm just going to finish painting and I'm going to try and syringe that back into the bottle. But it's not Armies Painter's fault. It's my fault. I'm an idiot. I have done this before and I should know better than just to squeeze the bottle. But there we go. Thankfully, having some small syringes at hand can help clean up little spillages like this, so there wasn't too much paint wasted. I definitely know better than to squeeze these bottles too hard, so lesson learnt yet again. With the speed paints dry, I give everything a quick dry brush with Terminator Stone, which is a Citadel dry paint, which helps blend everything in together. Citadel dry paints always tend to get a bit of a bad rep, but I think for situations like this, they can be quite useful. Now there are two hero products that I just love using at every chance I get, and these are the Dirty Down Moss and Rust effects. I added just a little rust to the cages, and it left me with a fantastic and really convincing looking rust. Again, less is more here, so I try to keep this to areas that I think would be more likely to rust, such as the joints on these cages. With the moss effect, I'm just adding a little around the base of the rocks to make it look soggy and damp, which again, I think looks really convincing. Next, I'm splodging on some Mod Podge to glue down some leaf litter, then allowing this to dry before sealing it finally with another layer of watered down Mod Podge. To get this to sink in, I am dousing the area with isopropyl alcohol, which just reduces the surface tension of the adhesive and just helps it flow that little bit better into all the nooks and crannies. The final step on the bases is to attach some grass tufts. Now, I've used a few brands of tufts in the past, but I'm now a massive convert to these from Gamers Grass. They come in so many shapes and sizes, all on one sheet, so it's super easy to add some variety to your model bases. I'm using two different types here too, as the combination of lengths, sizes and textures really help sell a convincing effect. And finally, I couldn't help adding a little tuft wig to one of the skulls. It'll probably never be noticed, but I'll know it's there and I can chuckle to myself whenever I see it. Now with the spiders themselves, I'm actually giving them a really speedy paint job because I'm slightly short on time to get these finished before I go on holiday. Starting with a black base coat, I did a very heavy overbrush of dryad bark. An overbrush is a bit like a dry brush, but the paint goes on a little heavier and is a little wetter, so leaves more paint behind on the model, but still leaves the very darkest recesses shaded. I then use a much lighter dry brush of Gorthor brown on the higher areas, followed by a very selective dry brush of Baneblade brown just on the sharpest edges, such as the joints of the legs. To help blend the colours back in together, I gave the whole spider a wash with Agrax Earthshade, making sure not to let the wash pool on some of the more open, flat areas of the model. Now earlier in the video I did criticise the spiders of being a bit characterless, so to make these guys a little bit more individual, I'm adding some coloured spots to help differentiate them. After all, spiders do come in a variety of patterns and colours, and this way I'll be able to easily identify which is which on the tabletop. Last thing to do is paint in the beady little eyes in matte black, highlight up with a dot of white, and these spiders are almost good to go. With them glued in place, I boxed them up and shipped them off to Michael to go alongside his amazing handcrafted Mirkwood scatter terrain and John's brilliantly painted Thorin's company. I've dropped a link to both these videos in the description below, so make sure you go and check them out. Now in hindsight, there are a few bits I wish I had done differently on these models. My first mistake, I think, was using the FDM printed trees on one of the spider bases. At a distance it looks fine, but up close I know those layer lines are just going to bug me, so I might remake this fella if I end up with some time in the future. Also, once these guys come back to me, I'll be giving them a little blast with Green Stuff World's Spider Serum to add just a bit of webbage, which I'm hoping will really help sell that spideriness effect. Overall though, for a couple of evenings work and working to a self-imposed deadline, they haven't turned out half bad. Now I just need to paint all the orcs to flesh out the rest of the army, but maybe that's a topic for another future video. Thank you all so much for watching, especially my ever faithful patrons who have stuck through me through thick and thin and through lack of content, but I really appreciate your support. It absolutely means the world to me, and it means that when I do come back to making videos, I have the resources there to be able to do it. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you all in the next video.